I wrote a book last year. I don't know, has anyone got it? Has anyone read it? Excellent. It's called Cloth Bound because it is bound in fabric that my printer printed. Now, this book, Cloth Bound, took me 20 years to write. And I think it's because all the stories inside it, it's the stories that fill the book from cover to cover, start from 1995 right through to this year, really. And the stories are really important. I think because I've had the business for as long as I've had a shop for so long, I'm used to talking to people about the designs, and it's all about the storytelling of the images and the patterns. They're not just ordinary patterns, they're patterns that mean something to me, so they're motifs for my life. And this book is the nuts and bolts of that, and the nuts and bolts of the processes that I go to. And I suppose it's the insides of me as an artist. And I'm really lucky, actually, I think, to have a book like this. I don't know if there's that many artists that get that opportunity to have their life's work in one book. So I'm really honoured and privileged to actually be in this position, to be able to have a book and to be able to talk to you about it and to go through it over and over again. So it's about the process. It's about letting people in on that process, and that's why essentially I wrote the book. I wanted people to be involved in the process. I wanted people to get as much enjoyment as I do out of making things. And in my shop for so long, there were people that would come through the door and go, "Oh, I really love what you do, and I'm really not very creative at all." And I'd be going, "Yes, you are creative. Everyone's born creative." And I think why I wrote that book was to encourage people to do that. So before I wrote the book, I wrote the Imperfect Manifesto with my partner, who is on her way here in traffic. There she is. Perfect timing. The Imperfect Manifesto, we wrote this together about 4 years before I wrote the book. I'll read the manifesto out. Everyone is born creative, and every day is an opportunity to perform a new creative act. When it's hard to paint the clouds, we draw the mountains. Making things makes us feel good. We learn to do something by doing it. When we're brave, our life expands. Risk is what transforms us. Imperfection is our ally. We like to slow down and do one thing at a time. We take pleasure in ordinary, everyday details. Being mindful helps. Simplicity takes time. We don't mind if we're not too flash, and we care about being authentic. Living a modest life makes us happy. We'd rather ride a bike than take a car. We'd rather read a book than watch TV. We like to travel light. It's good to work with others. It's good to listen. Sometimes we name our chickens before they hatch. Many things can be solved with a strong cup of tea and a long walk. And when you get right down to it, the essential thing is to do what you do with your whole heart. So we wrote that. We just bought this little house up in the mountains, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and it was spring, and we had a glass of wine, and we were feeling expansive. So we sat down and wrote those words with a big sheet of paper and some coloured pencil, and just trying to capture the feeling of having this little house. It was a moment in time which, you know, I didn't think much when we wrote that manifesto. I didn't think much about the impacts of what that might be going for the future. But this manifesto has really become kind of like a guiding set of principles to live my life by. And at the time when we first wrote it, maybe I was living 50% of this experience. But now I have to say, with all the changes that have happened over the last couple of years, I honestly say that I'm 95% there with this way of living. I think it's so simple and resonates with so many people. I'm really, really proud of writing it with you, Amanda, and it means a lot to me and a lot to other people. That house I'd lived in twice. So this was the studio. This is the place where we wrote it, and I'd already lived in that house once before, and I'll get back to that later. This whole idea of this circular theme happening in my life over and revisiting a place or a situation seems to be a really common thing for me. I don't know if it's common to everybody, but it seems to happen a lot. So the manifesto, which first started off on this scrappy bit of paper, and I started printing it on tea towels. And my old shop, as a parting gesture in my old shop, we wrote it on the windows, and steadfastly refused to clean it off when the council asked me to do so, because every time I got up on the ladder to try and do it, well, you know, I offer to do it, then somebody would come by in the street and go, "We love that, don't take it off." So I'd get back down off the ladder and put the ladder away. And I don't know who ended up taking it off there. I think maybe it just got washed off with the rain. I'm not sure. So the manifesto is in the book. It's dotted throughout the book. It's in the front cover. It's each little sentence, it's a significant sentence is at the front of each chapter, and there's 8 chapters in the book, and each chapter is based on a significant collection of designs. I've done more than 8 collections, but I had to choose the most important 8, and it charts the history of my career, really, starting in 1995. So I thought I'd go through that, use that as the template now, and go through of what it was like to be me when I was little. Have a glass of water. That's me. I think I was about 10 then, 11, and I always knew I was going to be a designer of some sort. I really wanted to be an artist, but Margaret Thatcher said you couldn't be an artist when I was growing up. She said you had to get a job. Being an artist wasn't a job. And so I thought, I'll be a textile designer. No, I didn't. I thought I'd be a designer. I didn't know what a textile designer was. But I was quite good at drawing, so I thought I'll do design. And when I went to school, I had a crush on my art teacher, Erin Wilcox. She had lovely brown arms and blonde hair, and I just loved sitting there watching her and listening to her talking about art history. And she told me she was a textile designer. So I thought, all right, I'll be one of them. She was a really good teacher. She encouraged me to study hard and apply myself and not to rest on my laurels. That particular phrase she used in a school report once, I was really pissed off with that. Rest on my laurels. I'm not complacent or lazy. Never, not once. And now, even 40 years later, I still work like I did when I was in the art room. I work hard, and I've got a lot to thank her for. So this is me at 17. I left home, went to college, because everyone in the UK back then left home really early, not like they do over here. And I went to Stoke-on-Trent, which at the time was the most unglamorous college to go to. But that was all right, because I was there to work, not to do anything else. And that's me in the first year of art college, looking like something out of a flock of seagulls, in Stoke-on-Trent, in my living room, working. And there I am again. This is the second year at art college. The course I did, it was called multidisciplinary design. It had a bit of glass blowing, a bit of ceramics, a bit of all sorts of stuff. And that's me there. We'd decided to build a glass kiln, an outdoor glass kiln in the winter in the Midlands in the UK, and we had to chop all those little tiny bits of wood up to wood. It was a wood-fired kiln to get the temperature up to 1,000 degrees centigrade to be able to melt the glass. And I'm just there making a little slump mould for some of the glass that we were about to melt overnight. And it was an overnight kind of project, and the local paper came in and took a photo of us. And anyway, I looked really miserable, because you always did in the 80s, I think. You had to look miserable. And this is where we lived. This is my very first design from college. Those are the houses, the terraced houses that we lived in when we were students. I still think it looks like that now, actually. That's my dad's favourite design I've ever done, by the way. And then in my second year, there was a national competition, and I got shortlisted, and I had to go to London, which was a big deal. I had to go to London and be interviewed. And so it was the 80s, early 80s. I wore a little mini skirt made out of that fabric, because this is the design for the competition that I was shortlisted in. I have my Doc Marten boots on, my black tights and my black little skivvy and my peroxide blonde bob. And I went on the train down to London and got interviewed by Mary Quant. And I didn't really know who she was at the time, but from under her fringe, she said to me, "So, do you know who invented the mini skirt?" And I said, "No, not really." She looked disappointed, and I didn't win the prize. So I graduated and went to London and got a job as a textile designer working in Brixton for a company called Anna French Fabrics. And this is the kind of thing that we had to do with these watercolour florals. And my mum's got this on her wall now, actually. I nicked it on my time that I was there. It was a great education. So each design had about 25 colours in it. So each half-toned watercolour effect that you can see there had to be repeated every time you did a new colourway. So it was just painstakingly laborious, but really, really good training for for getting your colours sorted out, and I got really good at watercolour roses, I have to say. And one of the things in that job to break up the tedium of having to paint flowers over and over again was I could go on little trips in London to the V&A, which this project that we're doing here is all about the V&A, and I got to go into the bowels of the Italian section in the 16th century columns, and I had to, for one whole week, draw those ornate marble columns just to get that sense of, shadowed, chiaroscuro as they call it, or as my art teacher called it anyway. So that was my first job. It was good, but I was fresh out of college and I wanted to go and see the world, I think. Margaret Thatcher would have told me to stay, but you know how much I love her. So I came to Australia. The UK then was cold and miserable, and there was about 8 of us, I think. It was 1989, and the bicentenary images of Australia had been flooding the TV for far too long, and we were all jealous. We all wanted to come on an adventure, a bit of a holiday. So 8 of us came over together and did the combi thing, going around Australia just for a year, of course. And it was a spontaneous thing. I had about £200 in my pocket, a portfolio of designs to sell, and a combi van to drive around Australia in. But of course I fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the space and the scale and the distance, and just everything about it was just different, so different to Australia, and I felt invigorated. And I arrived on Valentine's Day 1989, and that was the day I fell in love with the country. It's true, I'm not talking rubbish. And the first few years, I earned my living as a freelance designer. Unfortunately, doing things like this, which was really boring and unexciting, but it's a very generic kind of universal style of designs that that's what I trained in doing, that kind of thing. And the first designs I sold were to people like Sheridan and Charles Parsons and Bruck, and they kept commissioning me and my friend Penny, who I went to college with. We set the business up originally. They were asking us to do these designs more and more. We got really quite good at it, and we were earning some decent money. And there were personality-less designs, I'd say, and they would commission us, and they would take complete copyright over the design, and they'd get it sent offshore to get printed and bring it back into Australia, and that was the market, And I was thinking, this is all good to start with. It's great when you're running your own little business and you start earning an income. But then after a while, the novelty wore off, and it became a bit dull, and I was still entranced with the difference of this country, this Australian country. I was overwhelmed by it, and I wanted to be creative. I wanted to be responding to what I was seeing rather than just recreating to British, versions of designs. So one day I thought, I'm just going to start painting, because I hadn't painted before at all. I just sat in my living room. I happened to have a little Banksia flower sitting there, and I just started painting what I saw. And that was the beginning of me getting into the Australian bush, translating the Australian bush. From that point on, I drew everything that I saw, and I used the drawing as a filter for my experience. Because before that, I'm not explaining myself very well, I think, because before that I was overwhelmed with what I was seeing, the colour and the light, and everything was so different from the UK. I was sort of stuck with knowing how to translate that. And so all I realised, is I just start from where you're sitting. and work out from there. And that's what I did, because my struggle was I never really saw myself as an artist. And you know, she did a bloody good job, that Maggie Thatcher. I just never saw myself as an artist. I saw myself as a designer, and I didn't see that those two things sat together. It took me a long time to allow myself to have both of those identities within me, I guess. So these drawings, which I now do, like, I can't stop myself, they just pour out of me now. This is my living room at home with a rising damp on the floor there. They're just, and they still are, they're a means to an end. They are a filter, so they're ways of capturing things on the periphery, you know, just little moments in time, sort of abstracted thoughts. And they're a means to an end, and at the time when I was doing them, I didn't realise what the end was, but I just knew that I was tapping into something really good. Then one day, Penny, that's my friend Penny from the UK, she suggested we had our freelance business going on, and she suggested that we should put a print table into our warehouse in Marlborough Street to start experimenting and mark making on the fabric, because up until that point we'd just done everything on paper, you know, pre-computers. This is ages ago, pre-computers. And it was, you know, the idea of recreating our experience of what it was like at college. I thought this was a really good idea. This was late 1995, and I thought, let's go for it. Let's try and create something new. And I think it was at that point that we got that print table in our warehouse space. That was the point at which cloth began. We allowed ourselves 6 months in the studio, and we were playing with colour and shape and paring the elements down to their essence. We were trying to get the influence of the Australian landscape without being really overt about it. Texture and scale. It's obvious now, I think, but I don't think it was that obvious at the time. But it was just pure experimentation and sort of having a bit of a knees up, having a good time. So we did lots of hand dyeing and shibori, and this is batik and discharge printing onto velvet. Just explored the whole thing without any expectation or you know, thinking that we were going to do anything with it. We just wanted to play around. We didn't even have the name of the business at that stage, I don't think. And because we realised that no one else was really doing this at the time. We had Ken Doan with his opera house and his Harbour Prints. We had Jenny Key and Linda Jackson. They were doing good things with koalas on jumpers. And at the other end of the spectrum, we had the Indigenous painters translating the landscape in an amazing way. But at the time, there were no designers working in an abstract way to get the Australian landscape, as far as I could tell anyway, onto textiles and into people's homes. So we saw an opportunity. This is another dyed example of what if. That was my mentality at the time. What if you put masking tape on a bit of fabric? What if you drop dye on the top of it? Does the masking tape stop the dye seeping in underneath? And that's what happens. It sort of separates. I didn't know it would do that. That's one of my favourite bits of fabric. It's a hemp wrap. I've still got it. So it was very experimental, and but we saw an opportunity to sort of push it further. And so what we did was we wrote a business plan and went to the bank. We asked the Westpac Bank for $10,000, and they said yes. That's the only business plan I've ever written in my life. I've still got it, framed. And so the result of that, that kind of commitment, going to the bank and writing a business plan is a bit of a commitment, was the first collection we produced was Seeds. And this looks like a hand-dyed piece of fabric, but it was a screen-printed translation of it. So we were just sort of, you know, all this hand-dyed shibori. I thought it was going to be very difficult to run a business out of that, to make an affordable fabric. So I knew that the best way to do that would be to start translating these ideas into screen-printed fabric so that somebody else could print it for us. I never wanted to be a production printer. I never wanted to do all the printing myself. It's always get the idea, get it out to somebody else to do the hard work for me, and then get on to the next idea. That was my very pragmatic approach to business. So by creating a product like this, and this for some reason hasn't got the label on the top. I don't know what happened there, but we came up with a name and we were taking control of our brand, really. We had total control over the production. No one else was, taking copyright off us, and this was very empowering at the time. Still is empowering. It's a good thing to do. And we found a local printer called Scott. He originally used to be involved with signature prints. And Florence Broadhurst and all that stuff. So Scott in the early days used to, it was before the Florence Broadhurst stuff was being printed, but he was part owner of that company, and he started printing for us in Sydney. Then he decided to leave that company and move to Wagga, and he's been printing for me ever since. No one else has printed any of my fabric. So Scott has, I've seen his kids grow up. He's been with me for 20 years. In his 25-metre shed in Wagga. I think we've given him 80% of his work over those 20 years, and it's all done by him in that shed, by hand. He's printing my manifestos there. So this is Scott and his process. So I guess everyone knows what screen printing's like. We all did a bit of it at school. It's very manual, like this. And then he takes the screen out to the sunshine and dries it up. And there he is, old Scott, grumpy old Scott, and his huge shed. I still can't believe that he's done all of my work pretty much on his own in that space, all very manual. So the next collection in '97 was called Broadcloth. And this was a really much more considered collection than the first range. The first range, Siege, was all about just getting it out there, just putting them all together in a book, and that's the collection. This collection was more about, a little bit more, we created a brief for ourselves, trying to pare back the essence of what we were doing on the table, using paper cut stencils. Everything was very manual and easy to work with and accessible. And we wanted to consider the whole collection this time and working with each other, rather the previous collection was a little bit too eclectic for me. And this is like, I think I've written in the book, this second collection's like, I imagine being in a band. You do your first album, you just do it, and then the second album you're like, oh God, what if it doesn't work? But so there's a lot more consideration, I think, in the second collection. And this kind of defined us, I think, a lot more than the first range. And we're also now, we're in a warehouse in Marlborough Street, and we were starting to get quite a bit of press. This was our very first piece in the Herald, and that's us lying on the print table with Agnes Moorehead. She used to come to work with me all the time, and she's very photogenic. So we were getting all this press suddenly, then, and developing a customer base. Because originally we thought we'd be just for trade and architects, interior designers, and I was getting an inkling that actually the general public would be really quite interested in what we were doing, because it was, we were making an Australian product for Australians. That's, I know the irony's not lost on me that I'm English doing all this, but maybe it's hard to see what's in your own backyard just sometimes. But anyway, that's what we were doing it for trade, and then we realised that a lot of people were getting really interested in what we were doing, and I was getting this idea that I wanted a shop. I wanted my own little shop. But Penny didn't. Penny didn't want a shop. She wanted to keep it as a trade kind of situation. And then within probably 18 months that this photograph was taken, Penny decided to leave. And she went to the Southern Highlands and grew vegetables and milked cows, and was very successful at creating a little organic farm for herself and her family, and got lots of woofers coming over and doing that whole thing. But I decided that what I needed to do was to open a shop. But what I had to do first was take on the debt and pay the bills, because we were quite heavily in debt at that stage. That's when I took on my first bookkeeper, which is a good thing, because I'm not very good at paying the bills. So once I got that business, the first thing I did was go and find myself a little shop. And that shop was in Clovelly. I live in Coogee, and I live in the mountains as well, but I've got a little place in Coogee. I've had it for 20 years, and one of the key things I wanted to do was to walk to work along the coastline with the dog and have a swim in the mornings before I open the shop up. That was one of my dreams. I think that's another English thing. It's like, if you're in Australia, you might as well really push the boat out to live the dream. And I did. That was that shop. I think we had that shop for about 5 years. I absolutely loved it. That was the day we opened. So the first thing I did when I took the business over was to open that shop, and the second thing I did, I became a workaholic. I just went crazy with the work. I was just experimenting on that table. So the print table was in the shop front itself, and all the fabric stock was around the edges, and the shop honestly was no bigger than this bit here, so it was all squeezy in trying to do the work, and often the print paste would be sort of end up on the stock of the fabric, but that was okay because it was all, you know, one-off pieces. And so I thought originally that I would be open, the shop would be open 1 day a week, and I'd be able to be in there 5 or 6 days producing the work. But as soon as I started doing that, then the door was shut. I'd be getting these notes passed under the door and these greasy nose marks on the window. Why aren't you open? What are you doing? So in the end, it ended up being that I was open 6 days a week, and I'd be squeezing all the production work in around that, or the prototype work in around the edges. So people really responded ever so well to that shop. It was like, in my mind, you know, it's like taking a kid to a farm, and you can see the cows being milked. I recognised that there was a useful thing for people to actually see the process, and I know that's done a lot now, and it makes a lot of sense. And especially when you're a small business with no marketing budget, the best thing to do is to be standing there and demonstrating and doing it in front of people. It's always the best way to go. So the other key thing here is that I started really reveling in being able to use the landscape as bringing the images of the scale of the landscape into my designs. So this is the next sort of crucial stage in getting the collection to where it is now. So stuffed olives, this was a very huge scale. I was playing around with the idea of a 3-meter repeat. So this piece of fabric was about 3 meters long. It's on my sofa now. It's been there for 10 years. So the thing about screen printing by hand is that the printer can do anything I want, really. He'll grumble and moan about it, but he can do anything I want. So things like, you know, rotating the screens, or running out of ink, or you know, missing sections of the print as you're printing, he could do that. And he didn't like doing it because it meant, you know, I might not like what he produced, but as long as I promised him that I'll accept whatever he made, he was prepared to experiment. It took him a long time to really feel comfortable with that. But this was when I was really starting to experiment with the idea of the free repeat and the placement, and gradually all of that playful work eventually started honing down into a collection. And this is the early samples of a design called Two Up, which is about aerial perspectives of the waterhole. So at this time as well, I was really looking at the landscape, the Australian landscape, and trying to be as literal as I could. Whereas before it was really subtle, now I'm starting to really push the point. So that's a design. The previous one is all that's. Can you see the difference? That's my prototypes, me messing around with it on my table, and then that is the clean and lovely version of my printer's production piece. During this time, this is sort of 2002, 2003. During this time, I got the opportunity to go to Alice Springs to work with some Indigenous artists. I was in quite a tricky spot personally. I had the new shop running, and I had one staff member, I had all these overheads and this debt still around my neck. And I was recently single in my love life as well. And the world felt big and scary, and I got this opportunity to go to Alice Springs, and I was a bit nervous about it, but I went there and thought, I think this is going to be quite a good experience. And being out in this centre of Australia in that huge land, and meeting all those artists that just so constant and grounded and low-key, they really helped me find my feet and feel comfortable in my skin. And this picture here is of a moment where I was in Utopia with some of the women sitting around the outskirts of this boys' initiation ceremony that we couldn't see, but we could experience the edges of it and the heat and the dust and the smell and the noise. And I started writing. This is the first time that I started using text in my not in my design process, but in the gathering of the information. Up until now, I was just doing sketches and drawings, but now I was starting to use words and recognizing the importance and the power of abstracted words. And from then on, I've always now, from this point on, used words and images together in my textiles. And this has become so embedded in my practice. I've just got mountains of sketchbooks like this. I draw and write wherever I go. That if I'm walking out the door without my sketchbook these days, I feel like I've not got my underwear on. It's that integral in my process. This was last year up in Hill End, doing some drawings out there, looking very intensely on the horizon. Then one day, I hadn't thought of the Blue Mountains, then one day I met this lovely woman called Beck in Clovelly hanging around, and she bought a little house up in the mountains, the little house that we'd mentioned before. This is Govetts-Leap, look at, this is at the end of the street, and I went up and visited her in a little house and got blown away by the sheer impact that view has got, and this moment started my next love affair with the mountains. So Beck had this house before Amanda and I have this house. I might be confusing you, but it'll make sense in a minute. And Beck built me a shed because I just spent all my time in the spare bedroom drawing, so she thought she'd better kick me out of the room and she built me a shed. And I was just in heaven. I was there in that shed pretty much for 3 years, on and off, up and down the highway, to and from my shop, running the business down in the city, going back up there whenever I could. In those days, I didn't have a mobile phone and I didn't have internet access, and so it was very convenient. I didn't have to talk to anyone for days on end, which, think about it now, I can't imagine, but that's what it represents for me, I guess. The first collection I designed here was called In the Shed, funnily enough. And it's all about the rhythm of the travelling up and down the mountains, the roadworks, the aerial views of housing developments. And Spot Check came from that time, so that's the key design in that collection. So it's about, well, this one particularly is about housing developments on a hillside. It's a long story, I won't go into that now, but you can read it in the book. So Spot Check and Boardwalk, probably the hardest working designs I've ever produced, these two designs. They're so hard working. They're on the front of the book. I think they're probably my most significant designs out of all, I guess. And then the second collection I did up in the mountains then was I started getting involved in the native plants, and this is the wattle and the banksia and the kangaroo paw. All of these designs came from sitting in the garden and drawing what I could see, and it took me a while to feel comfortable with translating native flora because it's such a strong looking, they're all such strong looking plants, and in the UK everything's all daffodils and tulips, and it's easy to translate them as a watercolour, but here watercolours just didn't cut it, I don't think, and so it took me a while to realise that what I should be doing is, like Margaret Preston did, get out the lino cuts and start, it's like the physical act of cutting into that lino just felt like it represented the strength of the natural native plants perfectly. So I hit a jackpot, I think, when I got those lino printing tools out. And so the lino prints then turn into a mini screen. That's my studio with my mini screens in the banked up in the corners, and so a lot of those images that you can see there originally started off as lino prints. And so of course I was working hard in the studio, and poor old Beck didn't get a look in, and that's right, I saw more of the shed than I saw of her, and she had enough, and then the relationship ended. This is all about my personal life, this one, sorry, but it's true. So it was a sad day. I had to pack up and leave that studio, and I didn't know whether I'd be back. I hoped I would be back, but I wasn't sure that I could be. And then so I went back to the city, got a little studio in Ramwick, and carried on, as you do. This time working on a collection called Sunroom, so it's all much more bright. So I wouldn't have produced this, for instance, in the mountains. It's much more tropical, so it's quite good to get a little change around in your studio. Is probably good for the development of the fabric collection, really, I guess. So I was happy enough down in Sydney and Randwick doing my thing, and then the opportunity came out of the blue to buy the house up in the mountains again. Because when Beck had sold it, she'd sold it to a guy called Harold, and Harold was a photographer who had a studio near me, and every so often over the course of the 8 years that he owned the house, he'd pop his head in and say how it was going and just stay in touch. And then one day he came in and said that there was a big storm and all these trees had fallen down, and the house was okay. And I coincidentally at that stage was about to go up for the weekend with Amanda, my partner now, that we'd been together for a little while, and we figured that we wanted to move up to the mountains. And so we went up that weekend and looked at the studio and the house, and the trees all fallen down around the edges without touching. Nothing had been touched. It was all in perfect condition, and even to the extent that Harold hadn't even wiped any of the doodles off the windows. It was exactly as it was when I'd left it 8 years beforehand. And we looked at each other and we thought, we need to buy this place. And so we did. We bought it off Harold. We went back down to the city, went to the pub, the Norfolk, had a beer and some chips, shook hands, and the place was ours. So we bought a dog. We moved up there, we bought a dog. This is Harry. And I started creating my next collection. So this was the point at which we wrote the manifesto. So that full circle thing has happened again. And so the next collection, which is the last collection in the book, is called Natural, because it was very natural. It was the obvious thing to do. I was in, it was all about the trees. The trees had got us back up to the mountains again, and so I decided to base the collection on the trees. The twigs of the conifers that were lying on the floor, the ironbark trees, and the Wollemi pines. And the ancient Wollemi, that's the ironbark, sorry. And that's the Wollemi. The ancient Wollemi is in, lives in the Blue Mountains, and I think the mountains has got the status that it's got because the Wollemis are there, and there was a chap who lived in Blackheath who found the Wollemi trees, and so I thought I need to honour those trees and I'll do a design around them. But I must say the Wollemi tree is really quite ugly, so I went. So I went in close. I did a little magnifying close up to the covering of the pod, and created this design, which is one of my favourites, I have to say. It's not as bright as the others. I think it gets a little bit overlooked for the brighter colours, but it's one of my quiet achieving favourites, I think. And there it is in our friend's house in the setup for the book. So this is the full circle, really, and it's the last chapter in the book. And during the process of doing this, it took me about 8 months to write the book. And during the process of this, I turned 50, and I kind of, it gave me a moment to reflect and review my life. And I had this business for 20 years, and I was, am I going to carry on doing this business for another 20 years? It felt really neat to have I could literally close that book and close a chapter of my life. And it dawned on me that maybe I might close the business or shut the doors or do something different. I just knew, this cyclical thing was just hanging around for about a year. And I knew it was time for change. And I either was prepared to close the doors or I needed to get some help to let the business carry on to the next stage, to the next book, perhaps. Maybe that's what it is, book 2. But I wasn't wedded to either. I could close the doors or I could get someone in to help me run the business. I wasn't wedded to either outcome. And so I got some advice out in the marketplace, and I approached this company called Ascraft, who were in my very first business plan 20 years beforehand. I'd mentioned them then. And they're the company I'd been working with for a long time. And I spoke to the Ascraft boys, and they decided that they would help me take the business on and free me up to do some designing, because I wasn't doing enough designing work. I was just bogged down with the day-to-day running of 6 staff and 2 a shop and, you know, an office. It was all getting a little bit too hard. So this collection here, which isn't in the book, which is the latest collection that we've done, is called Bloom, is a result. It's the child of the offspring of the Ascraft boys and myself. And it's been 12 months now, and I feel like the process of writing this book and the turning of 50 and the going back to the house up in the mountains, all of this kind of cycle and regeneration has brought me to this place of creating a collection that is the starting point for the next 20 years. So I now can honestly say that I can see myself at 70 in 20 years' time standing on this podium talking to you about the next stage. Yeah, and that's it. That's my story to date. And so the next thing to do is to on Saturday is to be working with these guys at the library. And also I've got a show on down at Object, which is, there's so many circles I keep forgetting where I am. I'm going round and round. So Object is down on William Street, which is my old shop, and I've got a retrospective exhibition on down there at the moment in my old shop. It's weird sitting there where it used to be my place. It's not mine anymore, but it's good. It feels very energetic. So all of this rambling stuff that I've been talking to you in fear of my computer about to crash, it's all down there in its physical glory, along with the fabric offcuts and the artworks and all the stuff that you've seen in this presentation. I hesitate to call it a presentation, but this talk. So that's it. That's my ramblings finished, and I don't know if that's been very enlightening. Is that good? Okay.